I think I should start this off by saying that I'm not the best storyteller, so sorry about that in advance. Also, I'm from the UK. He lived in one country, me another in Britain. I never met him until this incident. So, I met Tom through this app called Geeking. I won't lie, that place was a breeding ground for creepy individuals, and just in general, awful human beings, and of course, 13-year-old me was using the app daily. I started talking to him about his mental health issues and the classic dynamic of a young girl who just wants to help this older boy who she has a crush on, so then becomes his therapist begins. What I learned over the years of being his emotional support victim, Tom was 2 years older than me, had a bad upbringing with many mental health issues because of it that he often struggled with. Our heavily toxic verbal relationship was very on and off for over 2 years until I put an end to it in the summer of 2019 after he had threatened me, and I blocked him on everything and moved on with my life. Winter 2019. I'm working in a cafe, still living in the deep country with my parents, hardly posting on social media when I get a message. It's from an unknown Instagram account. I really wish that I had screenshotted the first message, but it pretty much went like this. Hey, it's Tom. We haven't spoken in a while, but I'm going to a concert this weekend and it was the city nearest to me, and I thought about you. I texted back to be nice, just saying that I was doing well, but I ended it with, I would rather not stay friends. He said that he's comfortable with this and the conversation ended. So it's 2 days after. I'm working my 5-hour shift in the cafe. I come in through the back door like I always do, and I see a pile of what are like old clothes at the edge of the window. I don't think anything of it. I do my shift and I grab my stuff and I leave out the door. I walk down the street, still feeling completely safe, until I'm grabbed by my bag in this 6'2". I was only 5'3" at the time. Large man who I vaguely recognized was smiling down at me. He says my name and another huge wave of fear kicks in as I immediately recognize his voice. It's Tom. I don't even give him the time of day to speak. I just shook him off and started power walking down the street towards a shop where I knew my dad was at. Looking back, I kind of think I should have ran straight back to my work, but as a 16-year-old who had never been in a confrontational or terrifying situation before, I just ran straight to a parent. Tom follows me, shouting my name. I manage to lose him and I make it to my dad. After that, I got a message from the Instagram account saying that he was sorry, but he was in love with me and needed to have me, which still to this day makes me sick to think about. He also mentioned that he thought it was romantic he traveled all this way, him being at the bottom of the country and me at the top of mine. I blocked that account and later made a new one. I also contacted my work about it. That's where my boss checked the security footage outside and told me that he had been sitting there since 8 in the morning. I started work at 10 a.m. He was the pile of clothes. I blamed myself for a really long time and shrugged it off as not that big of a deal. However, the more that he got in contact with me after, the more petrified I became. I'm now in therapy because of it. I've received texts from him with messages that he's changed, that he's sorry. He's a Christian now, and the latest one is that he has a terminal illness and needs to see me one last time. Since changing my number and email, I haven't heard from him. I've been told by others that going to the police might make me feel less safe, as they can't do anything now as it's over the internet. I am back to feeling safe now, which is great, but I hope that we never make contact again. I want to start off saying all these years later that I can look back and understand now what was going on, and I scold my younger self for not taking action quicker, or stopping it right after it started. However, I will defend my young 20-year-old self by saying that I grew up socially sheltered and was a late bloomer to a lot of things. Friends, parties, drinking weed, an actual, not strictly AOL-IM romantic relationship, so on. So at the age of 16, I started as an apprentice to a certain not very common trade of skill. In the almost 20 years since then, I've worked pretty much all over the area, but there were several places where I worked for a long time. Also to notice that 95% of my day was working in the back of the shop. But because there was the rare time that I did have to go and speak with paying customers, I didn't dress like a slob. More formal casual. Now this field is mostly male-dominated, so I've had my fair share of bad men having no problem telling me this wasn't a woman's place, and they didn't try and hide their locker room talk. However, the worst of the worst was a man named Curtis. I was young, 20, and very naive. On the first day of work after being hired and upon meeting him, he made a point to tell me how he always spoke his mind, and most people didn't like him because of that. So he gets at least points for that. I quickly learned he liked to talk, I mean a lot. And it also didn't take too horribly long to realize that he probably wasn't telling the truth. He spoke several languages, including his wife's native language, who by the way he had saved from her terrible poverty home country, and was also pregnant with his 5 children. But according to him, the highlights of his life that led him here were: he started off as a police officer of a somewhat nearby town, and the day that he saw a man beaten to death in his cell by other officers was the day that he decided to quit. So he went to work as an English professor at a somewhat near and well-known university. There he wrote his novel, My Life as an insert name police officer. And now he only somewhat teaches, but mostly he's transitioned his life to this line of work. All of that was unsettling and a little annoying enough, but throw in the inappropriate questions such as, how are your bowel movements? Yeah, that was an actual question he had asked me out of the blue one morning. When I replied that wasn't really a line of questions I thought 2 co-workers, a manager and an associate manager to be accurate, to have, he very defensively assured me there was nothing wrong talking about the biological body as long as you used scientific words. So here's where it got really bad, and where I think he might have been a predator that had started to or was trying to groom me. I'd only been working there and with him a few months when he made it a point to tell me that I could be a really pretty woman if I cared about my style of dress and how I did my makeup. Keep in mind, it didn't matter that I hardly worked with customers. It was the professional thing that a woman in the workplace needed to do. I felt uncomfortable and embarrassed all at once. In my mind, he was basically telling me how ugly I was, and I later found out he was telling everyone who would listen that I was too fat for this line of work, and if it had been up to him, he wouldn't have bothered hiring me. The catch was he offered to take me shopping, and he would fit the bill on everything. This still made me uncomfortable, but in my young mind, he was superior and he was offering to pay for everything. I was a college, degreeless 20-year-old kid living in a really crappy apartment, living paycheck to paycheck. It hardly seemed like I was in the place to turn it down. So he took me shopping. He picked out a bunch of skirt 3-piece suits for me. Waiting outside while I changed, and he showed him for his approval. Then he took me to a very expensive designer makeup store, where he directed the girls there on which makeup to use, basically giving me a makeup right there, and then buying all the makeup that had been used on me. If this wasn't bordering on inappropriate, after all this was done and purchased, he took photos of me, so as he said, I could see and understand the difference in the before and after. That's about as creepy as it got. We worked for about another 6 months together before I got sick of him and all of his lies and leers, and every time we worked together, he made sure to critique my wardrobe and how I had done my makeup and hair that day. I decided to do the bare minimum of sleuthing, to find that he never was a police officer for said town, and currently wasn't nor ever was teaching at the university where he said he did. I wrote a long letter to my boss's boss, detailing all of his lies and what he thought were appropriate topics of work conversation. He was transferred to another location soon after that, but it didn't stop there. Nearly on a weekly basis, he would call and ask or tell me that he needed me to come to his location because someone had called off of work, or he was overwhelmed and he needed help. I would always say no, and he would always back it up, saying that he would pay me extra for my time. Luckily, within the year, I didn't work there anymore, and I've never had to deal with him since. So even though I've got other stories of crap I've had to take from men in the workplace, he was by far the worst. And I wonder how bad it could have gotten if I really had wanted his time, attention, or even praise from an older man. How very different it all could have turned out. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants or workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until the next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, etc., aka my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make more money, while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and so they had no option but to work with us. Hooray. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic. But he had impressed me over the phone, so what the heck. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person. Just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and a crew at a new job site at 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining to help Jim get used to the way that we worked, and to make sure just to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, just send him home and he would start over with me there the next day. 9:45 a.m. My phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm not awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this, and now what? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? Well, he's freaking insane. He's ruining this person's roof and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part since my crew spent more time talking than painting, but I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would only take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down and to send him home, and I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize and to tell him that he could bring his cousin Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. Boss doesn't consult me, says it's fine, and I have to deal with it. Great. New job site, new day, and I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. Now, to Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. Yes, bow before me. I'd asked to speak to him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any questions that I had. I was convinced and he did an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves. A job that was mostly trim work for a family of a mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. Sure, fine. Halfway through the job, about 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music and I see Oscar furtively look at him and then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. I don't care about anything anymore, so I do what he says. Oscar sprints to my car and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss has been ignoring their phone calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day I came and he would make sure that I talked to them. I thanked Oscar and told him that I would deal with it right then, and requested that he hang around and proceed as if anything is fine, in case I need his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and a hot mother. The family was rushed, and so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest was rather confusing. Apparently Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder position as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line, but a freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor, and I promised them that this will be dealt with immediately. And with that, I walk out to confront Jim. I asked if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and he handed it over. I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, zoomed in, etc. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down and screaming at me. Me launches at me and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called and I handed the phone over. I was interviewed. Poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar. We get tipped and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they really didn't know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes and I'm home watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't care, I continue watching TV. A few minutes pass and I hear yelling from my neighbor's house. I look out the window and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as were to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors where I was, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiotic, slack-jawed face staring at the window about 6 feet away. And then he pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I could even register that this was actually happening, I grabbed my own gun, which I would have heroically used to use on myself in the foot or something. My living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple cop cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car. He apparently had only taken one out to wave it over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. Now my neighbors are elderly, nosy, snarky, and call the cops on any and everything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life.